However much a murid may need to marry, he should not forsake the stipulations of aspirancy, shurut al-irada, the conditions of the path, either when he is first married or later on. When he is newlywed, he should respect them by having a correct intention, while during the course of his married life he should do so by means of goodness and character and behavior, and respecting the rights which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted to women, and which, since we've detailed them in the Book of Marriage, we will not reiterate here. He actually lists 12 rights of a woman over her husband: toleration of faults, provision of financial maintenance, equal treatment of co-wives, and other such topics. So again, see here how Imam al-Ghazali is integrating the married life into his complete project, which is single-minded in its focus on akhirah. Marriage too is part of the path. The way to the akhirah is not just something that we do to amuse ourselves along the way or even to keep out of trouble morally. No, it's a context for the cultivation of the virtues, tolerating the faults of the spouse, patience, seeking a halal livelihood, the necessary virtues entailed by the procreation of children, learning the ahkam of sharia with regard to the rights and responsibilities of each sex. It is a sign of sincerity in spiritual aspirancy that one marry a woman who is poor but religious, rather than seeking after a wealthy one. Someone once said that the man who marries a rich woman will find 5 things in her: an expensive dower, a delayed wedding, lack of service, constant expense, and an inability to divorce her should he wish to do so because of his fear of losing her money. And this is a problem in the Muslim Ummah now, that this question of the mahar spiraling completely out of control. The Guardian newspaper in London recently did some research. They found out that the average Asian marriage in Britain costs £85,000. £85,000. People routinely take out a second mortgage on their homes to finance it. 2 or 3 excursions to Karachi to choose and to buy the wedding dress, an expensive hotel, extravagant food, the right kind of musicians, little gifts for the departing guests, and nobody really enjoys the event. It's kind of over formal and a kind of potlatch ceremony. You know, the Indians of the west coast of the United States used to display their wealth and prestige by throwing everything they possessed onto a great big fire. Well, Muslim wedding practices are often pretty comparable. Pure riya, pure ostentation, as if one is serving the honor and the dignity of one's beloved daughter by this kind of extravagant waste. This is a problem and has to be overcome, and sometimes it's quite extreme. If I can be allowed a personal confession here, I once was smitten by a young lady in Saudi Arabia, and after inquiries discovered that the going price was 100 million riyals. I don't know what that would be, 25 million pounds at the time. And this is completely haram, one of the signs of the qiyamah. So many young people are not getting married because of this meaningless and stupid abuse of the wealth and resources of the ummah. So the Imam is well aware of this. The case of a poor woman, however, is quite the opposite. Someone else remarked, a wife should be beneath her husband in 4 things, or else she will despise him. And here, anybody who's interested in political correctness should close their ears. A wife should be beneath her husband in 4 things, or else she will despise him: age, height, wealth, and lineage. She should be better than him in 4 others: beauty, manners, character, and scrupulousness in matters of religion. if you think about this, this is not an anti-female sentiment at all. The mark of sincere aspirancy in married life is good character, husn al-khuluq. Statement that we need to think about. Good character. Not the idea that we can somehow lower our standards when we arrive home and the world isn't looking, and we can slump on the sofa and demand food and drink and shout at the wife and shout at the children because, well, we're the master of the house and we can do what we like. The world does those things to us outside, but at home we can do what we like, and the question of akhlaq is not really relevant. She's only my wife, for heaven's sake. Imam al-Ghazali says, the mark of sincere aspirancy, spiritual wayfaring in married life is good character. And here he gives some interesting examples. A certain murid once married a woman whom he served so constantly that she was embarrassed and complained to her father. I'm quite bewildered, she said, by this man. I've been in his house for years, and not once have I gone to the privy without his arriving there before me with the water. Now, this is a hyperbolic kind of tale, and it's not assumed that this would actually have happened, but Imam al-Ghazali is merely giving it as an example rhetorically in order to emphasize that this is a virtue. It's not a demeaning of the husband's status to serve and to help his wife. He's presenting it here very emphatically as a virtue. Another aspirant married a woman of great beauty who shortly before the wedding was afflicted with the smallpox. This is another not quite real story, but one which has a moral to it. Her family were beside themselves with grief and feared that he would no longer find her beautiful. Instead, however, he pretended to them that he himself had been afflicted with ophthalmia, and then that he had gone quite blind, so that when she was given to him in marriage, her family were no longer distressed. He continued in this way for 20 years until at last, when she died, he opened his eyes. When questioned about what he had done, he said, I did it deliberately so that her family would not be grieved. You have outrun all your brethren, he was told, through your goodness of character. Kind of legendary story whose point is not that we should be imitating this, but rather that one should make sacrifices for the happiness of the bride and her family. A story that some of you will probably be familiar with already is that of Hatim al-Asam, one of the early Sufis, known as Hatim al-Asam, which means Hatim the Deaf. One of the stories given for why he was called the Deaf was that he was engaged to a woman, and on their wedding night, when they were alone together, they'd been, mashallah, eating well, she accidentally broke wind, which in Arab Muslim society is an absolute no-no. You never do that. And as a nicely brought up lady, she was absolutely filled with horror and humiliation. And she said, I'm terribly sorry. And he said, what did you say? I'm really sorry. Sorry? And he was known as Hatim al-Asam, Hatim the Deaf, because of that example of husn al-khuluq and respect for his wife's sensibilities. And then another interesting, colourful story. Another Sufi once married a bad-tempered woman and endured her company patiently. When asked why he did not divorce her, he replied, I'm afraid that someone else might marry her who is unable to tolerate her and will suffer accordingly. Well, I don't know that any of us are that good these days. The point he's making is a serious one, that toleration of faults is a virtue, and in marriage, which is a blessed state and Allah hates divorce, it is a particularly important virtue. Virtues are not less because they are in marriage, in fact they are more because of the permanent consequences of a breakdown in the relationship. الطلاق يهتز له عرش الرحمن. Divorce shakes the throne of Ar-Rahman. Again, something that we forget. And then some more stories. It was for this reason that the Salaf made haste to marry and to marry off their daughters. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib said, Satan never despairs of anyone until he has endeavoured to tempt him through women. And the converse is presumably also meant. And Ibn al-Musayyib said at the age of 84, when he'd lost the use of one eye and was almost blind in the other, in my opinion, women are to be feared more than anything else. By which he means the fitna once encountered a truly ancient Libyan who was marrying this young teenage bride. He said it was to keep him away from fitna. The man looked as if he would be dead in a few months. What kind of fitna he was afraid of, Allahu A'lam. Inshallah, his intention was a good one. Another story of Imam Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, as we know, one of the great muhaddithin amongst the tabi'een. I think probably we can end this chapter at this point and move on. The other stories are merely driving home the point rather than adding anything new. And let's try and fit in before Maghrib Imam Ghazali's conclusion